Hello, welcome to Such a Nightmare, Conversations about Horror. My name is Katherine Troyer, and joining me is the one and possibly only Anthony Tresca.
I actually think I did a search of my name one time. I think there are other Anthony Trescas, or there were, because I was named after an Anthony Tresca in my family.
Sadness.
I think he's dead now, but I think there was another one, perhaps?
Then never mind. Joining me is just one more of the many Anthony Trescas.
Well, I wouldn't go as far as the many. Maybe like the 2 or the 3. Tresca's it's not that common of an Italian name.
Super common. And so now you know that you're filled with commonness. This is a podcast that is devoted to thoughtful discussions about that fine line between the horrific and the horrible, which is usually Anthony's puns. Each episode looks specifically at a horror text that is, for better or worse, giving us nightmares.
And we are very, very excited and so thankful to have you all joining us for this week's discussion on 2017's The Babysitter.
Excellent. So this is our first Netflix film that we are talking about, and that's an exciting moment.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's one of those films that I think has already started to gather quite the following of just, you know, people that are like, yeah, I like this film a lot. Which is, of course, what Netflix wants in their power for control of the world.
Yeah, so it wasn't made by Netflix. Like, this wasn't one of the films that like Netflix self-produced or anything. They bought the distribution rights to this film.
Clever.
So it's a Netflix film in name only.
Interesting. And there is your insight into how Netflix will someday control us.
They may buy the distribution rights for you.
Ooh, now that's a movie.
Hashtag fake deep.
That's funny. Okay, so speaking of not fake deep, one of the things we like to do in our podcast is begin with a sort of theoretical framework, and that comes from me. And this isn't a film, it's a little too new to really have a ton of scholarship being produced on it, because even though, you know, it's from 2017 and that feels like forever, it just takes forever for things to get published, academically speaking.
Yeah.
But there are things that are happening in this film that make it interesting, that are things that are happening in stuff that is being written about.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you wouldn't have said that if you didn't have articles that you're about to read that prove that exact thing. It seems like it was too polished for that to just have been an off-the-cuff thing.
Yes, no, because
it would be really sad if you just were like, I'm sure, at the end of that.
Yeah, that'd be delightful.
Or just
I'll do that next time.
Next time, just
I
set
bet there's some stuff. Moving onward. Today, though, I know for sure that there's a really interesting article that comes out of the edited collection called Uncovering Stranger Things about the show Stranger Things, another Netflix thing. And this particular article is entitled The Monstrous Queer Child, Mobbing, Bullying, and Bad Parenting in the 1980s. And it's a co-written piece by 3 different authors, all of whom I'm going to slaughter their names. So I'm just going to say their last names. It's Berns, Fontau, and Zarate. That's how I've chosen to say it. I'm sorry if you're listening to this episode and that is your name. But what I love about this article is that they talk about this sort of reflection, this nostalgic reflection that Stranger Things gives us, of what 1980s looked like in a time when we were very concerned with bullying, but through the framework of today's understanding of bullying.
Right.
And even though the Babysitter is not set in the 80s, it has that nostalgic charm to it that kind of feels a little bit timeless. There's an intentional timelessness to it, even though Cole, for example, has a laptop that he can watch Mad Men on.
And Mad Men exists.
Which
inherently does dated it's at least past when Mad Men was released, which was 2014? Is that just a random year I've said?
I have no idea.
Let's do a quick Google. Turns out it was a random year. I just said it's 2007 to 2015.
Excellent. Yeah, so it was in there, though. 2014's in there. And so, yeah, so the film is very clearly present day, but it does still have that sort of nostalgic charm. And what I find really interesting about this article on talking about bullying is it's talking about the idea that there's a very specific type of character that is bullied in the show Stranger Things, and it's very similar to the type of character that is bullied in The Babysitter. Mm-hmm. And it is this character type that they are describing as a character that exhibits queer masculinity. And they're saying that queer masculinity is not the same as homosexuality, right? It's more something that is deviant to our definition of traditional sort of hegemonic masculinity. And so in Stranger Things, right, it's a bunch of kids who are frequently bullied, who play, Dungeons and Dragons.
They're geeky.
They're geeky.
It's like the Big Bang Theory type of masculinity. It's like they're a more sensitive, weird, quirky little men.
And it's the same in The Babysitter, right? That we have Cole. I mean, the first time we see him, he's scared about getting the shot.
Yeah.
He's a little soft. He's a little delicate. I think about that face he makes when his dad is doing the donuts in the parking lot, right? And he's like terrified, pretending to care and pretending that he likes it, right?
Right.
And everything about this character sort of is set up so that he undergoes this like hero's journey where he becomes the more traditional masculine figure.
He has to face every single one of his fears systematically.
And he has, and that includes winning over the quote love of his life, right? His female neighbor, right?
And his babysitter.
And his babysitter, yeah. So he has to vanquish.
He has to vanquish her.
And he has to win. And so there's just so much about it. And I think that it's really interesting that this text does something that is an element we are seeing in other things as well. And that is this portrayal of the queer masculine child who is initially set up as sort of this monstrous figure. We see them being bullied, but we also see them becoming oftentimes not what they were at the beginning.
Yeah. They are forced to undergo a change because what they are is wrong or bad or doesn't, or really more to the point, doesn't fit within the status quo.
But what's interesting and what I think is important about both the show Stranger Things and The Babysitter is that although the character undergoes these changes, or characters undergo these changes, we're still supposed to believe that there was nothing fundamentally wrong with them to begin with, right? That yes, they're stronger now, yes, they survived now, but they were only survived because they had these traits, paying attention, listening, using lines of communication, being a good kid, that allow them to move to this other camp.
You think that's true for The Babysitter?
I do.
Interesting. I don't know if that's the case, because the first line of the film is "there's nothing to be scared of." I believe that's the first. It could be some nonsensical screaming from him at the first. But it's from that first scene where he's with the needle. And that's the first line. There's nothing to be scared of. And so I think he does start the film in a place where they're fundamentally putting him down. He's in a place of weakness. And the film, through the dialogue and his characters, kind of beats him over the head with, you are afraid of something that you should not be afraid of. You have to stop that.
So I think that the film, and this is where I have a little bit of a problem with the film that I otherwise very much like, because it's horror comedy, which means I'm, more or less predisposed to like it. I think the film simultaneously shows us that he has to be different in order to overcome his fears, but also he's aware, for example, of the fact that there are creepy crawlies under the house because he listened to his mom talk about it. Right? He is able to use his childhood treehouse because he still has a connection to his childhood. The girl who he is friends with, that whole scene happens because he's respectful of women. Right? So I feel like there are ways in which he's having to overcome certain things, but there is also a way in which the film is saying that, certain aspects of who he is are, quote, okay. And I think this is where I have a problem, is I feel like sometimes the film gives us a little bit of a mixed message regarding that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the film is 100% solid on what it's saying about this.
Which we will unpack a little bit more, but before we go there, would you give us our sort of introduction to the film that is The Babysitter?
Just a little bit this time. Babysitter came out in 2017. you already made me spoil a big thing I was going to say about Netflix.
Sorry.
Just being the distributor of this film.
Thunder stolen.
Yeah, really. Thunder has been snatched.
It's so sad.
Very, very sad.
You could reclaim it. You did. You tried.
I did. I tried.
Okay.
I came back and I said it again.
Yes.
Just in case anyone wasn't listening the first time. It's directed by a filmmaker, Joseph McGinney Nicole, but he is not known as that. He's known as MCG.
I know. So cool.
He's so cool. What a great guy. What a fun little name he's got.
Yeah, I wish I had a cool nickname. I've always wanted one. I never got one.
I guess we're just not the people who get nicknames. I've never gotten one.
It's so depressing. I had one, but it was not worth repeating. So
I had one. Bad.
No, it wasn't bad. It just wasn't cool by any stretch of the imagination.
I had a gym coach who used to call me Fresca because he was like, I drink Fresca. Your last name is Tresca. Change one word, one little letter there.
Yeah, that's not cool.
It's not cool. It was a lame nickname.
I had people call me Stubbs because I have short legs. So again,
that's
not so cool.
No, that's not.
Yeah, so this gentleman, though,
MCG
has a very cool name.
Yeah. So he kind of had just been involved with the music industry for a while. He directed music videos. He's a former record producer, did a bunch of albums, and then he directed the Charlie's Angel film, which was pretty good, pretty big hit at the time. And then he went on to do a couple of other films. He's kind of been dismissed by a lot of people. He's not a very well-respected filmmaker within the industry. There's a lot of people make fun of him online and for whatnot for the type of films and stuff that he makes. But I think he did a pretty good job with this film, all things considered. However, critical reception to this film has been kind of like tepid at best. On the whole, there aren't a lot of critical reviews for this film, which I guess means that the critics just skipped it. They just decided an MCG film was not for them.
Or a Netflix film.
Was not for them.
But I think there's some inherent prejudice kind of built into that lack of critical reception.
Yeah, and so a lot of these, like anything number that I'm giving you, particularly when it comes to the critical reception, is going to be, it's not going to be 100% accurate because there's just not a ton of critical responses to this film. So on Rotten Tomatoes, a site that usually has over 100 reviews, there's only 26 reviews from critics. It's at a 69% there, which is pretty good.
Yeah,
it's got a 60% from audiences on here. The Metacritic score is they just don't have one.
Wow.
Because only 2 critics have reviewed it. And both of the critics gave it negative reviews. So it would be, one gave it a 48 and one gave it a 0.
Wow.
So it would be really low on that, on Metacritic.
You know, I feel like I'm not sure what it would take for me to give a 0.
I've seen some 0 films.
So I've seen some films that, like, I mean, I know I have too, but I just feel like, I mean, we're talking about, that's not just like having an apathetic view towards it. That's like having, I mean, that's truly having just a, like, physiologically negative response.
Yeah, do you want me to read what they say about it?
Yes.
It's 0. It's insulting. Unfunny, blunt. It'll leave a hell of a bitter taste in the mouths of general audiences and horror nuts alike.
That's very intense.
It is blunt. He's right.
Blunt, yeah.
It's right to the point.
Yeah, and, you know, it's interesting because some of what he's saying is absolutely true, but I think that's part of its charm.
Yeah.
I
don't agree with him about unfunny.
Yeah, I certainly don't agree with him about unfunny. But I also think that some of its bluntness is it being, like, very self-aware. Like, okay, you know that time when the hunky dude takes the shirt off? Well, you're about to see it, and it's not going to make any sense here because it never makes any sense. And so I think actually that, like, that's a redeeming element of the film.
Audience score on Metacritic is a 6.8. IMDb score is a 6.3.
Which, for a horror film,
not terrible.
It's not terrible.
None of these
it's never terrific. I mean, nobody's like, yay, I got a 6.8.
Yeah.
But it's not the worst we've heard or discussed.
Yeah. Netflix apparently was like, you did pretty okay, MCG, because they're bringing him back to do a sequel to The Babysitter with him as the director and the producer. It's going to be written by American Vandal showrunner. And the original cast members, Lewis, Thorne, Amel, Lee, Batchelor, Mariano, and Bibbs, are all returning. So that's
Excellent.
pretty much the entire main cast.
Excellent.
Which is good.
Yeah. So there'll be something to look forward to.
Assuming you don't think this film is a 0.
Yes. In which case there will be something to avoid.
Yeah.
So the first time I watched this film, I started it and I wasn't very far in. It was actually where she comes up and tells the bully, like whispers in the bully's ear, and then he's like, "You're sick, lady." That I stopped it and I was like, "Oh, I can't watch this alone. I have to watch this with someone because it's too good." So then I did, and I had a delightful time. I
had a different experience.
Had a very different experience.
So I also did not watch the full thing all the way through the first time I watched it because I turned it off. I didn't. When I first saw the film, I saw it, I think, when it came out. Like, I was like, this looks interesting. This looks like it could be fun. I might like this. And then I didn't. I think I got about 30 minutes in, and I was like, this is obnoxious. Turning it off.
Yeah, and see, when you told me that, I was flabbergasted is the best word. Like, I was truly and honestly flabbergasted, because when it comes to our taste in horror comedy, we're not always 100% in sync. Like, one of us will like it a little bit more, but there's not a horror comedy we've talked about yet where one of us has absolutely hated it. And so it just was like shocking to me. Do you remember why?
I don't really think I was paying attention quite as much. I think I may have also, like, been watching it and, like, been on my phone or something.
Yeah.
So I wasn't giving the film its full attention. And so I think, like, a lot of the satirical elements and, like, the self-awareness, and because a lot of that it's communicated not necessarily just through the script, but through the sound editing, through the editing in general, which is very hyper-stylized to be self-aware.
Yes.
And so I don't think I didn't give the film a fair shake by not giving it my full attention. Which, dear listeners, if you're watching a film, turn off your phone. Watch the film.
I know.
This sounds pretentious, but it's two separate things.
And I'm saying that at the exact same time that just last night, I was on my phone doing something while watching a movie. Right? So, like, it's just so easy to do, but you're absolutely correct that no matter how good a film is, you're not going to be as invested when you're not invested.
Yeah, when you're not actually watching it. So I think that was the case.
That makes sense.
And so then I told you this.
I was abhorred.
You told me to go watch it again.
Yes.
Which I did that night. And I came back the next day and I said, you were right. I really liked it.
Excellent. Yes. And reasons for liking it. So
there's a lot here.
There's a lot here.
I already mentioned the sound design, which I think is... Sound design is one of those elements that I think often you just look over, but I was really impressed by the sound design in this film. Mm-hmm. It was very, very sharp. It was firing at all. I'm not, when I say sound design, I'm not just talking about the soundtrack, which was good.
Oh, yeah.
Or the score, which was also good.
Right.
I mean, just like the mix of diegetic and non-diegetic sounds, how sharp everything was. And it really matched the flashy, stylized editing that was going on.
And I think there's a lot of really, like, technical elements that this film didn't need to have. Oh, yeah. And by that I mean that, like, lots of films don't have, especially films that are going to have such a sort of simplistic sounding plot. But one of them is that I thought the color design was also really nice. Yeah. It was really crisp, but it also felt very... Again, stylized is a perfect word, but I think about, for example, a lot of those early scenes with B, they've chosen that sort of halo effect, right? Mm-hmm. Which is exactly what you want in what's supposed to feel, at least like at the beginning, like almost like a rom-com, right? You want that effect, especially because we're going to then see that stripped away. But even that scene at night when they're out... reenacting the movie, which, like, why did I never have a giant lawn and set up where my babysitter could do that with me? But, like, it's beautiful. It's beautiful shades of blue. Like, this is just a film that's very aware of colors that work together.
It's certainly got a vibrant color palette.
Yes.
It's very good. And, like, the poster design is also excellent.
Yes.
If you haven't seen the poster design, that has Samara Weaving's face just, like, in this weird, fun, neon-y color.
Yes.
Which, I mean, that's the color palette. It's, like, very all fun neon colors. Yes. And it's really good. I really like that as well.
And then there's just, like, little things that are worth giving a nod to. This is a rather diverse cast.
It is. It's true.
And
it doesn't feel diverse for diverse sake.
Exactly.
Like,
it feels like, why can't this person not be white, right? Why can't this person be queer even if they're not, you know, homosexual, right? I think there's just, like, so many ways that this film just is very intentional, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, jumping off that, I think a lot of the performances in this film are just excellent. Samara Weaving has kind of cemented her status as, like, a horror queen. She's done this film, which she's excellent in. She's also in Ready or Not, which she's also incredible in. She does a lot of good work. This is also... I have never been a big fan of Bella Thorne, but she's really funny in this movie.
She is.
And she's also admittedly given a lot of the best one-liners.
Yes.
And the scene where she gets shot in the boob is very funny.
Yes.
So she's given really good material, but also she elevates it through her performance.
Because that scene where she's upset that Cole has stabbed her, right? And then, like, there's that, like, heart-to-heart. That's a hard scene for an actor to pull off. Because it's a weird scene, right? Like, because you have to be very authentic, but also, like, still in the stereotypical character mold. And I think Thorne does a very good job of giving us what we need.
Yeah. And another scene that she just does really well is the whole where he's cutting the ropes off his hands and there's the mirror in the back, and she really sells that mirror gag. It's like, I can see you, and just the insulting of him is so iconic, and just like it's so funny. That's just a scene that, like, that is not an incredibly smart gag. Like, the mirror gag is on one level, it's fine, like,
sure,
but it's just, it could have just been like a throwaway gag, and it's like, oh, okay, I see. You're subverting the trope there. Yes. That could have been all it was. But her performance on top of that elevated it. I mean, I may have undersold it. It's a good gag, but she made it the gag. She sold it and made it better.
I think that, but also the way that particular scene was filmed.
Yes.
And the decisions there where we have the, you know, like, carry a pocket knife, right? Like, and so there's just a way in which it feels very much like action hero moment because of the camera angles and because of the shot types. And then we realize, oh, there's a mirror right there.
Right.
Also, I'm a big fan of Ken Marino.
Yeah, he's good.
I always think of him from Veronica Mars, where he kind of plays that very... I don't know. Can I say the word douchey? Can I say that?
I don't see why not.
Very sort of douchey character. And so it's you can't cast him without knowing the characters he usually plays. So to have him play someone that's not that's supposed to be this good, loving father, there were smart decisions made in this film.
Yeah. A lot of good stuff. A lot of really good camera work.
Yes.
Most of the time. I had a couple problems with it, which I'll loop back to, but one I want to really talk about, I really liked the scene in which his parents were leaving, that long shot in which the camera was entirely through the kid's eyes, and so you just were seeing the world through his eyes. Mm-hmm. And it was a good shot, very good, up and down, the good use of the stairs, and it also really helped establish the house as a home. Yes. It felt very lived in.
Yes. And this is why I think this film deserves to be watched, deserves to be talked about, because there is so much about it that is just cognizant of what needs to happen in order for this to be sort of a fun romp through a horror home. Through the babysitter narrative, right? Because none of this is new. Nothing that happens in this film is new. I mean, it is a little different to have just a group of teenagers that get together for some, like, casual human sacrifice. But even that's not new.
Sacrifices happen all over the world.
That's true.
But not in America with hot people.
Yeah. See, and there's the difference.
That's the difference.
But it's really not, other than, like, the super funny lines about, like, I don't think my tap is working, right? You know, and then the blood gushes out. I mean, there's funny bits, but the basic premise is so very familiar. What I think makes this film intriguing is the way that it says, but how can we take these familiar elements and take advantage of the fact that everyone who watches this film is probably going to be familiar with them? Mm-hmm. And the answer is not always that it subverts them, right? It's just that it presents them with the awareness we know what they are.
operating within, like, the repertoire of, like, known gimmicks within the genres and, like, storytelling devices allows this film to just be ironic throughout. It's, like, similar to another film that we've talked about, The Dead Don't Die, which has, like, the irony throughout. But I think this works better for both of us, actually.
Yes.
Because it's a stylized, aware of its irony throughout the entire film. It comes across in just, like, everything. So, like, I wrote down in my notes while I was watching the film, this film is so ironically horny. I love it. I love a knowing horny. And it's just, that is one element that is obviously clear throughout, but that's pretty much everything.
And it's something that some other horror comedies have done as well, very successfully. I think of Cabin in the Woods. Right, and the make-out scene with the wolf mounted on the wall.
Of course.
And I think of the film Final Girls, which, you know, is that premise of they're trapped in a horror 80s slasher film.
Jennifer's body plays with it.
Yeah, and so it's just, you're right, that there's something, like, about The Babysitter where they take that and take it to that next level. There's no reason they have to play Spin the Bottle, right? There's so many other games they could play.
Truth or Dare / Spin the Bottle.
Yeah, and so, but, like, and then, and so then there's this, like, weird, you know, make-out scene, right? And then, you know, there's the sort of gratuitous, in this case, male nudity for the most part. But you're right, that it is, like...
It's true.
It has that affect. And I think that where this film shines is in those moments where it is unironically horny.
Yeah.
I think where the film has some potential problem for me, if we're going to deconstruct it, right? If it's just like Brain Candy, it's about near perfect as Brain Candy.
Good fun.
Yes. As something that deserves a little bit more analysis, as I was watching this film, I was reminded of something you and I talk about quite a bit, and that is, you know, this idea of the horror genre as a film that reaffirms the status quo, as a film that is very sort of inherently conservative. And I realized, and I know this is a little bit bold of a statement to make, because I'm going to make something that's almost an absolute.
Hot take alert.
I know, but I think that it is... I think that by design, horror comedies are going to, if not always, the 99.9% of the time, be conservative in the message that they're trying to communicate. And it goes back to, you know, if we go back to, like, Shakespeare's definition, or scholars of Shakespeare's definition, and even further, right, of what constitutes a comedy, it's that it ends in a marriage. It's that it ends when all the pieces have been resolved. And there's other definitions too, but it's why things like Merchant of Venice, right, is it a comedy or a tragedy? Well, it has to, quote, be a comedy because there's a marriage at the end, despite the fact that it's an incredibly...
very sad piece about Shylock.
Yes, exactly. But it's okay because there's a marriage at the end, so it's happy.
Yeah, and Shylock just doesn't appear for the last act.
Who needs that? Who needs a downer on our wedding day? But, so when you take the root of that which is comedy, which is about reaffirming this sort of, like, status quo, and a genre like horror that is often going to do that anyway, I don't know if I can think of a single comedy horror film that manages to break out of that idea that in the end, that, quote, queer masculinity has to be, quote, fixed, that the witch has to be taken care of. And I think that's problematic.
So I would agree with you. I think for a majority, I think that's true. However, I think that the one exception is any type of film that is postmodern in its sensibility, because films that are and texts that are invoke postmodern ideas inherently kind of throw out all ideas about what is that you should return to the normal society, and that is good and right, and I think we see that with, like, The Dead Don't Die, which we just talked about on our previous episode. So I think that, like, texts like that would fly in the face of this argument, because that is a horror comedy, and it does not force you to return or encourage it.
Right. So,
however, I do see your point, though, about the larger genre of, like, mainstream-ish horror comedies.
And I would say that for The Dead Don't Die, I'm not even sure I would use the label postmodern, because in many ways you could argue that The Babysitter is a postmodern text according to Panito's qualifications. What I think happens, though, is that if it's a text that we can define as being a little bit more in the absurdist camp, right? So a little bit more Samuel Beckett, Harold Pinter type thing. And I realize neither of those are true horror people, but I think then it can do that, right? But how many films other than The Dead Don't Die can you think of that are horror comedy that offer that more absurdist approach?
Maybe Cabin in the Woods. I think maybe you could make an argument for that one as well.
So I think that Cabin in the Woods does not meet that definition of absurdist, but I think you were right that may be the one exception, and I think it's because they forced it to be the one exception of a text that says that maybe there's it actually literally says maybe there's something wrong with this world if we have to have this system in place.
Yeah. It's all about systematically taking down the system.
Yeah, that's haha. But yeah,
puns.
So, but we're talking one film, right? And that's true, like not absurd, and then films that fall under this more like experimental absurdist thing. And to me, there's a problem with that. If Cabin in the Woods can do it, and I think it does, because you're right, there's the 0.01, right, percent.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
We
found it.
Then we need to be doing it more. And I think that The Babysitter would have and could have allowed for that. We didn't need to have, this witch who's a woman and beguiles him with her beauty. And there's just certain things that were better than that at this point.
I agree. Again, I don't even think I disagree with you about that in this film. It's just, I think there are certain examples, and I'm sure there's more that we both can't think of right now that fill in that percentage. So, but that is a very interesting hot take about horror comedies, because on the whole, a lot of the horror comedies that are coming to mind, like the Happy Death Day films that we've talked about, Ready or Not. That one plays with a little bit, but really it's more about like her indignity of having been chosen as a sacrifice than because of some writing of the system. So it's just it's fun. It's interesting to think about.
Yes.
I take your point.
And you said that rewatching it this time, that there were certain things that you felt
didn't work as well for me. I thought so. I made a comment up front on what I liked. I said most of the editing was good. However, I didn't love certain pieces of editing, like the disorienting editing that was being used during the police phone call. It was very frenetic, and I understand why they did it.
To create that sense that you're in the moment.
However, I didn't like it. And you do know that I am not as big on jump scares. However, there was one I really enjoyed in this film, which was when Sacrifice Samuel was in the garage and he saw it there. I thought that was funny because I had totally forgotten about Sacrifice Samuel, but of course you have to put him somewhere.
Right.
So you have to put the dead body. So I was like, that's inventive. That wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting some jump scare, but I liked that it wasn't the one that I was expecting.
It wasn't quite a jump scare, but I did like but it's kind of close to it, where he accidentally kills hunky shirtless man.
Right.
And that was kind of the unexpected, so it wasn't quite a jump scare, but it was like well that just happened. So there were a couple, but you know that I adore jump scares, so I had no problem.
However,
with that.
A lot of the other ones were just I didn't love it. Like the jump scare with the plant. I just wrote the word ugh next to it. I didn't love that.
I think that if you're going to make a film where you were saying this premise has been done 1,000 times before, how can we reinvent it? And if you're going to have things like the cutting the knife off gag and things like that you then have to be smarter in your jump scare.
And
they could have.
And they did. And I thought they had a really inventive jump scare. But then they also have the scene where the babysitter is revealed to have been behind the door as he's there. Mm-hmm. And there's this huge wah sound. And I'm just like...
I know how you are about the diegetic.
Why did we need that?
Or the lack of diegetic
We
sounds.
Can clearly see her there. It's not like we need something else that forces us to look there.
I know, and I honestly, recently rewatching The Strangers and how rarely it used non-diegetic sound to remind us we should be scared in this moment, I was reminded of the beauty that can happen with a jump scare where it's the image and not the sound, right, that scares you. Or it's a sound that's organic, right, like the knocking on the door. So I will give you that I think that we need to now move past jump scares that rely on non-diegetic reinforcement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm sure you were not super pleased, because I wasn't. And you have more problems with endings most of the time, about the like, oh no, she's gone, sort of thing. I don't know.
I didn't mind it.
Really? I did. I did a lot.
It.
I don't know where it needed to end instead, but I just thought I know and I understand, right? The monster has to go away so that it can come back, especially if you're going to have a sequel and all that good stuff.
If we're going to have Babysitter 2, it doesn't work very well if the babysitter is not.
But I think it was just, again, if we go back to this idea that, like, what makes this film so good is it takes everything that is familiar and just, like, makes it a little bit more fun. That didn't feel more fun. That just felt like, oh yeah, don't forget we have to have her come back. It felt like there would have been ways, right? Like,
yeah.
And it would have been
your point. I'll see it.
Yeah.
It didn't bother me personally.
It bothered me, which is very surprising.
Yeah. But I think I was more annoyed with like the "this is my house" line that was just like so on the nose.
Oh yeah.
And I think that gets back to more of this is more of like relating back to your larger problem about like this I feel it's a destruction of him, because when the line earlier gets said by the father, "You're the man of the house," but it's clear he's definitely not in charge.
Right.
But now he is that man of the house. It's just so much of this film was about like subverting stereotypes and like seeing these different, like playing with these archetypal characters and making them act just a little different than normal and seeing what happens because of that. But then to just have him affirm this like man of house, I am man, I am good now, I'm in charge.
I would argue that it's because that character isn't. There's never really an attempt to subvert him. He's shown from the beginning to be, quote, wrong. All the other characters get to be a little bit more complex, a little bit more involved, right? But he is built to be our, like, but it's okay, because by the end of the film, he will be the man of his house. He will be unafraid. He will be able to vanquish the monster.
Yeah.
And there's a problem there.
Yep.
There's a problem with everything about that sort of premise, even though it's worked beautifully in other things, right? But I think about like Home Alone, right? Because this was kind of like the horror version in some ways of Home Alone with a babysitter.
Another 80s movie that I found related to his character specifically was Back to the Future, like the Marty McFly type of character.
And so, but in something like, especially Home Alone, I bet I could make an argument for Back to the Future as well. Our main character in that one, it's his, like, it's the fact that he is unafraid. It is obviously he's afraid of the basement, but like, it's all of his best attributes that get harnessed into him saving his home in Home Alone. Mm-hmm. In The Babysitter, it was, here's all the things you are, let's change them all so that you can save the home.
Yeah, and I think that's incredibly problematic because it enforces like a heteronormative, homogenistic view of masculinity and what is right.
Yes. I don't know how it would have worked, but how delightful would it have been if he'd survived because he was afraid and like following safety protocols the whole time. Again, I can't imagine that movie. It's a little hard, but that would have been intriguing and potentially...
That could have been interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the movie we make.
Yes. Called Follow the Rules and Don't Run with Scissors.
Yeah.
Yeah, or just don't run with scissors.
Or just don't run with scissors.
Okay, it's ours. It is claimed.
Stamp.
And henceforth and forevermore, you cannot write about anything that has that title because we have claimed it.
Yeah.
Yay. Our next film, and more importantly, our thoughts on our next film, is probably going to be when we lose the followers that we have.
It's true. We're about to drop some real, unpopular, controversial opinions.
That is, we're going to talk about the 1973 film, the 1973 beloved film, The Exorcist. Mm-hmm. Anthony and I are not fans of this film.
Yeah, I really don't like it.
And that's going to be very alienating for a lot of people, and we are very aware of that. So there are lots of reasons for that, and we both would like to say that we very much understand its importance.
Yes,
and
it absolutely did so much
yes.
for the horror genre, particularly in terms of legitimization
yes.
and integration into the main
yes.
stream.
And I require it as something that needs to be watched in a class on the home in American horror, right?
Yep.
But when we watched it, our feelings were underwhelmed. And so we'll talk about that. We'll put it within context. We will understand that you will probably stop listening.
Or you might just adamantly disagree with us.
Which we would love. What we would love is for you to listen and to disagree with every single thing that we are saying, and then to tell us that.
Yeah.
So please join us for that next episode. And in the meantime,
thank you for listening to this episode. Be sure to follow us on all of our social media. Continue listening to us. Friends, both dead and alive, about us.
oh yeah.
And we'll catch you on the flip side.